As a creator, you're always searching for inspiration. But what about those groundbreaking scientists who revolutionized our world? Their stories are filled with unexpected twists and turns. Join me as we explore the psychological framework of scientific creativity, revealing the secrets behind their extraordinary achievements. We often associate scientific breakthroughs with pure logic, but the truth is far more fascinating. Creativity is the secret ingredient that fuels scientific discovery. Today, we examine the psychological landscape of innovation, revealing the unexpected ways that creativity shapes the world around us. You probably won't know this, but many iconic discoveries began not with data, but with a feeling. A restlessness. A curious itch. Before you settle in, feel free to like the video if it brought you a little peace, and if you'd like to join us again, we'd love to have you back. Subscribe when you're ready. No pressure, just rest. Share something if you feel like it. Let's slowly drift into tonight's quiet moments together. You trudge through the hallway of your brain, and something is off. Not bad off, just the kind of off that makes you feel like you've misplaced a word, a smell, or a memory. This isn't confusion. This is the prelude. Creativity's liminal space. Scientists call it incubation, but you might know it better as that weird zone where you stare into space, avoid your inbox, and become suddenly very interested in reorganizing your cutlery drawer. You're not lazy. You're gestating an idea. Psychologist Graham Wallace, one of the OGs of creativity theory, famously proposed that this incubation phase is one of 4 stages in creative problem solving. And surprise, it's the least glamorous. No lab coats. No Nobel Prizes. Just stillness. And soup. Sometimes a lot of soup. But here's the thing, inside that stillness, your brain is doing something wild. It's forming strange new connections behind your back. While you're doodling clouds shaped like jellyfish, your unconscious mind is quietly rummaging through the attic, looking for forgotten parts of a solution you didn't even know you needed. That's the science. Now here's the weird part. Some studies suggest that creative people, especially in scientific fields, actually show higher levels of default mode network activity. That's the brain network that lights up when you're not focused on the outside world. Daydreaming. Wandering. Wool gathering. Or as you call it, standing in the shower pretending to be interviewed by Oprah. Fringe fact incoming. Some researchers once tried to map creativity in jazz musicians using fMRI. Turns out, the moment improvisation kicks in, the brain's self-censorship areas go dim, while those dreamy, spontaneous networks turn up the volume. The takeaway? Creativity is noisy, but not in the way you think. It's not chaos, it's tuned background jazz. And yet, philosophers still argue whether creative insight is truly unconscious, or if that's just a polite way to explain why you spent 6 hours thinking and only wrote 1 sentence. You know who you are. Here's a reality check. You might imagine great scientific minds like Marie Curie or Richard Feynman having epic, continuous bursts of brilliance. But in truth, those breakthroughs usually came after long, unremarkable stretches of mental composting. Periods where not much happened on the surface, but beneath, the pressure was building. Like a tectonic plate made of hypotheses and stubborn hope. In fact, some of the most profound scientific insights were described not as a logical march forward, but as a sudden click. You've likely felt that too. You're not alone. It's just your prefrontal cortex finally shaking hands with your hippocampus, making a weird neural deal in the back room while your conscious mind sips decaf and stares at a wall. Still, the waiting is hard. The unknowing is itchy. You want answers, motion, results. But here's where you need to be gentle with your process. You need to allow the thought to marinate. Let the oddball idea simmer. Because the mind is not a machine, it's a sourdough starter. Fickle. Temperamental. A bit prone to dramatic flops. But oh, so worth it. So tonight, when you feel stuck, or worse, uninspired, remember this, that liminal phase is sacred. It's the soft, mossy forest floor that gives rise to towering discoveries. If it feels slow, good. That means it's working. And don't be surprised if, while waiting in line for coffee or rinsing a spoon, the idea simply arrives. Fully formed. Smug, even. As if it had been waiting for you this whole time. Next time you feel the itch of a thought you can't quite name, lean in. That's not boredom. That's the beginning of brilliance. You're halfway through brushing toast crumbs off your shirt when it happens. That idea, messy, inconvenient, bizarre, flashes across your mind like a coffee stain on white jeans. You freeze. You didn't ask for this thought. You definitely weren't looking for it. And yet, there it is, sticky and undeniable, demanding attention. Welcome to the chaotic spark zone, where scientific creativity often begins not with a grand hypothesis, but with a casual accident, a broken petri dish, or a weird daydream about jellyfish. It's not always elegant. But oh, is it effective? You probably won't know this, but the discovery of penicillin happened because Alexander Fleming couldn't be bothered to clean up before his vacation. He left some petri dishes out, because science, and when he got back, he noticed mold killing bacteria like it was a Marvel supervillain. Boom. The world's first true antibiotic, brought to you by mild negligence and a healthy dose of curiosity. That's not a fluke, it's a pattern. Psychologists often refer to serendipitous creativity, those moments where accidents meet open minds. The accident itself doesn't matter. It's your reaction that counts. You could see a splatter and mutter, ew, or you could squint, lean in, and wonder, huh. That's odd. That, huh, is creative gold. It means your brain is willing to disrupt patterns, to break its own expectations. And that's where the magic lives. Study alert, in a famous experiment, psychologist Kevin Dunbar analyzed scientists in real-world labs. What he found was startling. Most breakthroughs weren't individual light bulb moments. They came from open discussion, often sparked by weird data that didn't make sense. Instead of throwing those results away, the most creative minds leaned in, debated, poked, and sometimes laughed at the absurdity, before realizing they were onto something big. There's a word for this in research culture: productive failure. It's when something goes wrong in just the right way to unearth an answer you weren't even looking for. You think you're hunting deer, but instead, you trip over buried treasure. Here's the fringe tidbit: there's an actual phenomenon called the Baader-Meinhof effect. Once you notice something new, you suddenly see it everywhere. It's your brain's confirmation bias on caffeine. And in science, this can lead to delightful madness. One odd result catches your eye, and suddenly, your world reshapes itself around that anomaly. Coincidence becomes pattern. Pattern becomes obsession. Obsession becomes discovery. But let's be honest, chaos isn't always welcome. Especially in science, where the myth of cold, clinical logic still looms large. Philosophers still argue whether true discovery requires a structured approach or if real creativity depends on embracing disorder. And you? You're stuck somewhere in between, wearing goggles and hoping your beaker doesn't explode. This is where curiosity comes to your rescue. Unlike information, curiosity isn't about knowing. It's about wanting to know. It's a biological nudge, a dopamine-loaded breadcrumb trail through the unknown. And in the creative process, it's the compass that turns chaos into something meaningful. Scientists who stay curious when data turns strange are more likely to follow those hunches into unfamiliar territory, where originality thrives. Picture this: you're pacing your kitchen at 2:13 a.m., muttering about viscosity and thermal expansion. There's a cork in your hand and 3 spoons in the sink. To an outsider, it's unhinged. But to you? It's everything. Your messy questions lead somewhere. And if you're lucky, they collide with someone else's strange idea, and suddenly, there's a spark. A classic case? The microwave. Percy Spencer was working on radar tech during World War II. One day, while fiddling with a magnetron, as one does, he noticed the chocolate bar in his pocket had melted. Did he panic? Nope. He got more chocolate, did it again, then tried popcorn. Fast forward, Now you can reheat sad pasta in 90 seconds. That wasn't a planned discovery. That was popcorn-fueled curiosity powered by a willingness to let accidents interrupt the narrative. The creative process isn't linear. It's tangled, contradictory, slightly embarrassing. But it's in those awkward stumbles, the shrugged shoulders, the wait, what, moments, that science takes a breath and leaps forward. So next time something breaks, falls, melts, or splatters, don't panic. Pause. Look closer. Maybe it's a mess. Or maybe it's the beginning of something extraordinary. Remember this, the world doesn't always reward the tidy experiment. It rewards the messy mind that saw a mess, and saw more. You're standing in the shower, conditioner marinating in your hair, when suddenly, you get it. That missing variable, that wonky mechanism, that odd little, what if, that's been eluding you for days. It just clicks. No whiteboard. No lab rats. Just hot water and tile grout. It's oddly romantic. And frustrating, too. Because you've been staring at spreadsheets, diagrams, and probably a coffee mug with inspirational quotes for hours. Nothing. Then you step away, bam. Insight. It's like your brain waited until you weren't paying attention. Welcome to the backstage of your mind. Here, the unconscious does its finest work, tiptoeing around your prefrontal cortex while your conscious self is distracted by socks or toast. Scientific creativity isn't always about bearing down. Sometimes, it's about getting out of your own way. Mainstream psychology calls this phenomenon unconscious problem solving, and it's not as woo-woo as it sounds. In fact, a landmark study by Dijksterhuis and Mers in 2006 found that participants who were distracted before making complex decisions actually performed better than those who consciously deliberated. Yep. Thinking too hard may be your creativity's worst enemy. It's like your conscious mind is the uptight manager with a clipboard, but your unconscious is the cool intern who solves everything while listening to lo-fi beats. They don't speak directly, but occasionally, they pass notes. And the notes? Often brilliant. Your unconscious brain doesn't operate on linear logic. It's associative, chaotic, deeply weird, and weirdness is a feature. When you sleep, zone out, or even mindlessly walk around the block, your default mode network starts running simulations, testing patterns, reassembling old memories with fresh glue. Somewhere in the chaos, a pattern emerges. Fringe fact for the win: Nobel Prize-winning chemist Friedrich Kekulé claimed that the structure of benzene came to him in a dream, a snake biting its own tail. Now, dreams aren't peer-reviewed, but hey, the man revolutionized organic chemistry with one very sleepy serpent. Of course, philosophers still debate how much of this is real and how much is retcon mythologizing. Did Kekulé really dream about snakes? Or did he rationalize the moment after the fact, weaving narrative into what was essentially guesswork backed by instinct? You, though, you know the feeling. It's not always dreams. Sometimes it's brushing your teeth. Sometimes it's when you're half distracted in a meeting, doodling spirals in the margins. And suddenly, insight. That's no accident. It's your brain doing a kind of creative composting, chewing on ideas without your permission, then spitting them back when you least expect it. This is why some of the most creative minds build space into their routines for nothing. Long walks. Boring errands. Sitting on porches like some retired sea captain just waiting for the fog to clear. The external world goes quiet, so the internal one can finally speak. Here's the twist: that silence. It's not empty. It's fertile. It's where your brain gets weird in the best way. One study from UC Santa Barbara found that people who engaged in undemanding tasks, like sorting objects, performed better on creativity tests right afterward. Not naps. Not Netflix. Just enough distraction to let the unconscious shuffle things around, like a Rubik's Cube you solve by not looking at it. It sounds counterintuitive, especially in scientific culture where productivity is king. But the most radical ideas often sneak through the back door, disguised as daydreams, hunches, gut feelings. If you cling too tightly to control, you miss them. Think about it. When Newton saw that apple fall, he wasn't trying to discover gravity. He was just watching, letting his mind wander into what-if territory. From that idle gaze, physics changed forever. So here's your homework, if you can even call it that: get bored. Truly. Sit on a bench. Stare at laundry. Take a walk without headphones. Let your thoughts slosh around without purpose. Because when you finally stop trying to force brilliance, your unconscious might finally raise its hand and say, "Oh hey, I've got something." You'll look up from the sink. Or step out of the shower. Or pull over on the side of the road and scribble on a napkin. And there it'll be. The click. You know that person who talks to themselves in the cereal aisle, wears mismatched socks by choice, and gets deeply emotional about the mating habits of tardigrades? That person might be onto something. Because here's a spicy truth: scientific creativity is often tangled up with traits we label as odd. A little madness goes a long way. You've heard the cliché of the mad scientist. Wild hair, eyes like espresso shots, muttering equations to their cat. But that caricature didn't pop out of nowhere. It's rooted in a strange but well-documented link between creativity and what psychologists call mild psychopathology. That's right. A dash of eccentricity might actually make you more innovative. It's called the mad genius hypothesis, and while it's wildly oversimplified in movies, it does have some real psychological roots. Studies show that highly creative individuals often exhibit higher levels of traits associated with bipolar spectrum disorders, ADHD, and schizotypy, without necessarily having full-blown clinical diagnoses. Schizotypy, by the way, is the less terrifying cousin of schizophrenia. It includes things like magical thinking, perceptual oddities, and unusual beliefs. And while philosophers still argue whether these traits hinder or help cognition, one thing is clear: people high in schizotypy are more likely to think in novel, nonlinear ways. In the lab, this shows up as increased divergent thinking, the ability to generate lots of different ideas from a single prompt. Give a conventional mind a paperclip, they'll say, "Clip papers." Give it to a slightly loopy genius, and they'll say, "Tiny lockpick, shoelace fastener, squirrel fencing, miniature sword for a mouse duel." The point? Weirdness widens the frame. It allows for leaps most people wouldn't dare to try. A classic study by Shelley Carson at Harvard found that people with higher latent inhibition, that is, people less able to filter out irrelevant stimuli, scored higher on creative tasks. Translation: their brains let in more noise. More randomness. More shiny things. And sometimes, amid the clutter, they spot connections the rest of us miss. Here's your fringe fact of the night: Nikola Tesla, the godfather of electricity, claimed to have vivid hallucinations from childhood onward. He often said his inventions would appear fully formed in his mind, complete with moving parts. Was he embellishing? Maybe. Or maybe his brain just played by its own rules. But let's clear something up: this isn't about glamorizing suffering. Severe mental illness can be devastating. What we're talking about here is a more nuanced spectrum, where quirks and neurodiversity offer a creative edge, not a deficit. In fact, some labs are now exploring how traits linked to ADHD, like impulsivity and hyperfocus, can fuel scientific discovery. When you're impulsive, you're more likely to try weird combinations. When you're hyperfocused, you'll chase those ideas obsessively until something clicks. You just might forget to eat lunch. Or sleep. Or pay your parking tickets. This brings us to a beautifully uncomfortable truth: to be truly creative, you have to risk being weird. Socially, intellectually, even emotionally. You have to embrace discomfort, ambiguity, and the occasional sideways glance from your peers. And you, dear thinker, probably already do. After all, you're here, listening to a sleepy deep dive into the psychology of science instead of binge-watching crime dramas or alphabetizing your spice rack. That says something. It says you're curious. Unconventional. Maybe even a bit strange, in the best way. So lean into it. The next time someone side-eyes your notebook full of strange diagrams, or your theory that tardigrades might hold the key to time travel, smile politely. Because history is full of scientists who were mocked before they were celebrated. Galileo, Darwin, Ada Lovelace. They all challenged norms and saw things others couldn't, or wouldn't. And while not every odd idea becomes a revolution, the willingness to entertain the absurd is what makes revolutions possible. So go ahead. Talk to yourself in the cereal aisle. Keep a dream journal. Argue with the furniture if it helps. Your mind, in all its wild, non-linear brilliance, might just be on the verge of its next breakthrough. You're sitting at your desk, allegedly working. But instead, you're fiddling with a paperclip, launching rubber bands across the room, and building a precarious tower of sticky notes. It looks like procrastination. Feels like procrastination. But plot twist, it might just be genius, warming up. Because here's the great, unspoken secret of scientific creativity: play is not a distraction. It's a strategy. We're trained to think that real scientists are solemn, focused, sober creatures, lab coats, data charts, pipettes. And yes, those things matter. But some of the most revolutionary scientific insights came not from rigorous, buttoned-up procedures, but from play. From tinkering. From messing around with things, just to see what happens. It's not just anecdotal. Research supports this. In a now classic psychology study, students were asked to solve a complex problem. Some were told to approach it seriously. Others were encouraged to treat it like a game. The game players crushed it. Why? Because play reduces fear. It tricks your brain into taking creative risks without the threat of failure looming overhead. Play invites exploration. It lowers inhibition. It activates the brain's reward system, releasing dopamine that fuels novelty-seeking behavior. That's scientific shorthand for, when you're having fun, you get weird in useful ways. Look at Richard Feynman, the Nobel-winning physicist who literally started cracking quantum electrodynamics problems while playing with wobbling plates in the cafeteria. He didn't intend to change physics, he was just goofing off. But his playful curiosity created mental slack, which led to insights under tension. Play gives the mind space to wander and connect things that shouldn't connect. Like soap bubbles and black holes. Like Legos and genetic coding. Like rubber ducks and fluid dynamics. Real example. Look it up. Ducks were involved. Want a fringe nugget? Charles Darwin was obsessed with collecting beetles in his student years. One day, he found 2 rare specimens. Desperate to keep both, he popped one into his mouth to free his hands. It promptly squirted acid down his throat. Did he stop beetle hunting? Nope. Did he revolutionize biology years later? Absolutely. Coincidence? Unlikely. That playful obsession, what some researchers call serious play, is the engine of scientific invention. It's when the mind is free to wander but anchored by a question. A puzzle. A tickle of curiosity that won't go away. Philosophers still debate whether play is inherently creative or merely a byproduct of leisure. But psychologists like Mihai Csikszentmihalyi argue that flow, that euphoric state of complete absorption, often emerges from playful exploration. And flow, as you've probably felt, is where creativity lives at its most vibrant and focused. Now, you don't need to build a trebuchet out of office supplies to access this state. Even light, mental play, like solving riddles, punning, or doodling metaphors in your margins, can loosen your thinking and unlock innovative approaches. It's about shifting out of should and into what if. Let's paint a picture. You're a botanist who notices a burr stuck to your sweater during a forest walk. Annoyed, you pick at it, study its tiny hooks, and mutter about laundry. But then, a thought. What if this hook system could be useful? Years later, Velcro is born. That's right, Velcro. Made possible by a forest burr, a sweater, and a moment of irritated curiosity. That, my friend, is creative play in action. You'll often hear innovators describe their process like this: I was just messing around. But that, messing around, is rarely random. It's disciplined whimsy. Purposeful nonsense. The willingness to suspend judgment and follow a thought wherever it leads, even if it feels ridiculous. It's risky. People might roll their eyes. You might even roll your own eyes. But scientific creativity doesn't thrive in rigid conditions. It thrives in the loosened corners of the mind, where failure isn't fatal, and laughter is allowed. So let yourself play. Pick up the weird tool. Ask the dumb question. Build the cardboard prototype no one asked for. You might not find a solution immediately. But what you will find is a brain that's limber, excited, and ready to connect the dots in a way it couldn't before. Next time you catch yourself doodling or playing with magnets instead of writing that research report, don't panic. Smile. You're not off task. You're warming up the circuits of invention. You blink. Your jaw drops just a little. Maybe you even laugh. Not the belly kind, but the sharp, startled kind that sounds like, huh. Something just snapped into place. Something big. You weren't expecting it, but suddenly, the world makes sense in a whole new way. That's your Eureka moment. And yes, it feels exactly like the punchline to a joke only your brain was setting up. Because scientific insight, the kind that reshapes paradigms and makes textbooks feel ancient overnight, rarely unfolds through step-by-step logic. It erupts. It lands with a bang. Or a laugh. Or a sudden, overwhelming sense of, wait, did I just solve that? It's the most electrifying part of creativity. And it's the hardest to explain. Mainstream psychology calls it insight problem solving. The solution arrives suddenly, often after a long stretch of cognitive silence. You're stuck. Stuck. Still stuck. Then poof. Unstuck. It's not a slow build, it's a mental jailbreak. One famous experiment by Janet Metcalfe asked people to rate how close they felt to solving a problem. With insight problems, like riddles or puzzles with a twist, participants reported no feeling of progress, until they got the answer. Then they'd light up, laughing or exclaiming, because the solution wasn't just correct, it felt beautiful. Elegant. Inevitable. Sound familiar? It should. You felt it too. That flash. That high-voltage jolt when everything clicks. Whether it's in science, art, or even cracking the perfect pun, it always feels like more than logic. It feels like magic. But of course, it's not magic. It's cognition. Your brain is quietly grinding away, often unconsciously, testing out patterns and permutations until something fits. It's like mental Tetris. Most of the pieces don't work. But then one drops perfectly into place. That's satisfying, ding. That's the insight. Fringe fact, the Archimedes story, him leaping from the bath, shouting, Eureka, because he realized water displacement could measure volume, might be apocryphal. But the psychology checks out. Warm water. Relaxed body. Wandering thoughts. Boom. Breakthrough. And here's the weird part, insight has its own neurological fingerprint. Brain imaging studies show that moments of insight are preceded by a burst of high-frequency gamma waves in the right temporal lobe. Your brain literally lights up milliseconds before you even consciously know the answer. It's your neurons throwing a surprise party. And you, the guest of honor, show up just in time to blow out the candles. But philosophers still argue whether insight is truly spontaneous or just a retroactive label we slap on complex mental processes. Was it sudden? Or did you simply notice it all at once? Hard to say. What matters is that it feels sudden, and that feeling drives behavior. It motivates, it rewards, it compels us to chase more problems worth solving. And let's not forget, sometimes the insight is wrong. Beautifully, wildly, hilariously wrong. But the creative leap is still valuable. It trains your brain to seek elegance. To reach beyond the obvious. That's the danger and delight of insight. It bypasses logic but feels like truth. That's why Einstein once said, if at first the idea is not absurd, then there is no hope for it. And look how that worked out for him. In fact, many of Einstein's breakthroughs came not from data alone but from thought experiments, mental simulations where he imagined riding a beam of light or falling in an elevator. These weren't calculations. They were wild creative leaps, wrapped in physics. And yet they gave birth to some of the most precise theories in science. The insight moment is also deeply emotional. Studies show that these aha bursts are often accompanied by positive effect. Your mood lifts, your body reacts. It's joy, surprise, and relief bundled into one sudden exhale. It's not just, I solved it. It's, I see it. And don't get us wrong, it's not always tidy. Sometimes insight shows up when you're too tired to chase it. At 3 a.m., blinking at a chalkboard. Or half asleep, repeating the same numbers in your head like a song lyric that won't go away. But when it lands, oh, it's glorious. You feel taller, smarter, floatier. And you might immediately forget to write it down. Classic. So, how do you court insight? Start by feeding your brain with raw material. Read, sketch, argue with friends, collect metaphors like seashells. Then step away. Rest. Doodle. Wash dishes. Wait. Let your unconscious throw a party backstage while you hum and pretend not to notice. Then, when the curtain lifts, be ready. Keep a notebook nearby. A whiteboard. A napkin. Because that insight? It's slippery. One blink too long, and it's gone. But when it lands, it'll feel like everything clicks. Like laughter after the punchline. And in that moment, you'll know, this is why you do it. Not for the hours. Not for the grants. But for the electric flash of something true arriving from nowhere. You're staring at your screen. Again. The numbers don't add up. The theory has holes you could drive a bus through. Your last 3 experiments flopped so hard they left skid marks. Every cell in your body wants to slam the laptop shut. Google, low-stress alpaca farms, and abandon science forever. Good. You're exactly where you need to be. Because in the psychology of scientific creativity, failure isn't a detour, it's a feature. Not a pleasant one, not the kind you frame and hang on the wall. But a critical, powerful force that shapes the way breakthroughs happen. Let's start with the basics. Failure activates a suite of psychological responses: disappointment, frustration, shame, and, if you're lucky, a full-blown existential spiral. But under the hood? It also triggers adaptive reasoning, especially in creative thinkers. Your brain scrambles to make sense of what went wrong, forcing you to reframe the problem from a new angle. That's right. Failure forces flexibility. In cognitive science, this is called a set shift. You abandon a rigid mental model and build a new one. Painful? Yep. Productive? Hugely. Think of it as a software update, one you didn't ask for, but desperately needed. A 2019 study out of Northwestern University found that scientists who experienced early career failure were more likely to produce high-impact work later. Why? Because they learned to adapt. To rework. To push past ego and into resilience. Here's a fringe fact. Thomas Edison once tested over 3,000 different materials for the filament in the electric light bulb. He eventually landed on carbonized bamboo. Would he have found it without all those misfires? Doubtful. His lab probably looked like a junk drawer exploded. But that mess? That was evolution in action. Philosophers still argue whether creativity is truly trial and error at its core or if that's just a clumsy metaphor. But one thing's certain, every scientific legend you admire, Curie, Tesla, Hawking, had notebooks full of dead ends. You just don't see those in museum displays. Failure also humbles you in useful ways. It disrupts confirmation bias, your brain's annoying tendency to only notice evidence that supports what you already believe. When your pet theory collapses in a heap of unusable data, you're forced to confront what's actually happening. And sometimes, that honesty hurts. But it also sets you free. Want a charmingly awkward example? In the 1980s, NASA engineers were baffled by radio signal interference on Voyager spacecraft. Weeks of failure. Finally, someone realized, it wasn't cosmic static. It was the engineer's own microwaves down the hall. Embarrassing? Very. Illuminating? Absolutely. That little failure taught them volumes about shielding, signal fidelity, and humility. Here's the trick: creative scientists don't avoid failure, they befriend it. They study it. They build failure into their process. They ask, what can this disaster teach me that success never could? That mindset, by the way, is called cognitive reappraisal. It's a form of emotional regulation where you learn to see frustration not as a dead end but as data. As raw material. As compost for the next experiment. But there's a dark side too. Not all failure fuels creativity. If you internalize it, start believing the problem is you, it leads to learned helplessness, where you stop trying altogether. That's why support systems matter. Mentors. Collaborators. That one lab partner who brings snacks and reminds you you're not terrible. In fact, one study showed that teams who shared and talked about their failures performed better over time than those who swept them under the rug. Why? Because open failure fosters psychological safety, and safety fosters risk-taking. Without that, creativity withers. So how do you cultivate creative resilience? First, normalize the flop. Keep a failure log. Make it funny. Decorate it with stickers if it helps. Second, build slack into your process. Time for review. Time to fail without derailing the whole project. Third, remind yourself, science isn't a straight line. It's a drunken hike through a forest full of bee stings, and every wrong turn still gets you closer to the summit. Let's get real, sometimes the failure will sting. It will knock the wind out of you. But other times, it will reveal cracks in your assumptions, cracks where the light of a better idea can finally shine through. So tonight, if you're sitting in the rubble of a failed experiment, a dead theory, or a bizarrely persistent Excel error, breathe. You're not broken. You're in the forge. You're sitting across the table from someone who, let's be honest, you find mildly infuriating. They interrupt. They disagree with everything. Their ideas are weirdly abstract. And somehow, you leave the conversation with a better theory than you walked in with. Welcome to the social side of scientific creativity. Because here's what no one tells you in those epic stories of lone geniuses scribbling formulas by candlelight: most breakthroughs are borrowed. Invention is a team sport. Always has been. Even when it looks like solo brilliance, there's usually a cast of unseen characters, collaborators, rivals, mentors, students, even exasperated spouses muttering, "Did you forget to eat again?" And all those people contribute fragments, feedback, friction. Yes, even the ones who drive you nuts. Psychologists call this distributed creativity, the idea that creative thinking doesn't just live in one skull at a time. It spreads across people, conversations, and relationships. Creativity is social. Which means the weirdest, most transformative ideas often come from the messiest, most human interactions. Want proof? Let's talk about Rosalind Franklin. You've heard of Watson and Crick, the guys credited with discovering the structure of DNA. What you might not know is that their famous double helix was partly inspired by Franklin's unpublished X-ray crystallography data they saw without her knowledge. Was it theft? Collaboration? A bit of both? Philosophers still argue. But here's the point: science moves through networks. Ideas don't care who holds them first. They care who's listening. This isn't just historical drama, it's cognitive science. When you share ideas with others, you force your brain to re-encode the information. You explain. You reframe. You respond. That process alone can generate entirely new thoughts. It's like shaking a snow globe in your mind. Suddenly, something beautiful settles. There's even a term for this: cognitive diversity. Research shows that groups with a mix of backgrounds, expertise, and perspectives consistently outperform more uniform teams, if, and it's a big if, they're willing to engage with each other's ideas, even when they clash. Fringe fact for your brain snack: the physicists Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein once had a legendary series of debates about quantum mechanics. They fundamentally disagreed. Repeatedly. But those disagreements sharpened their theories, and pushed the field into new dimensions. Literal quantum leaps. And yet, collaboration isn't always easy. It's vulnerable. It exposes your half-baked ideas to scrutiny. It demands trust, and sometimes bruises your ego. But scientific creativity doesn't just tolerate that, it requires it. This is where the art of creative friction comes in. Creative friction happens when minds rub against each other, not to destroy, but to generate heat. When you're willing to defend your theory and be changed by someone else's, you get something rare: intellectual alchemy. Something neither of you could have discovered alone. Think of it like jazz improvisation. One person lays down a strange riff. Another picks it up, twists it, transforms it. Before long, you're in musical territory no one rehearsed, and yet, somehow, it works. Science can be like that: improvised, collaborative, messy, brilliant. Of course, not all collaboration is smooth. Some people will hijack your ideas. Others will dismiss them. Some will plant seeds they don't even remember sowing, and you'll build entire forests from those seeds. That's okay. That's part of the dance. Because even bad ideas, the ones you laugh off or argue against, can sharpen your thinking. They give you something to push against. And pushing, in creativity, is everything. There's a fun term from innovation research called idea sex. PG-13, promise. It describes what happens when two seemingly unrelated concepts collide and create something new. And often, those collisions happen through conversation. You bring one idea. Someone else brings another. Boom, intellectual offspring. Weird ones. Beautiful ones. So what does this mean for you? It means your best ideas might not be yours alone. They might be echoes. Glimmers. Mutations of something someone else once said while waving a pencil and ranting about mold spores or Mars dust. It means you should talk more. Debate more. Steal more, but ethically. Borrow ideas, yes. Credit them, sure. But most importantly, transform them. Because that's the real act of creation, not birthing something from nothing, but reshaping what already exists in a way no one else thought to try. So next time you find yourself mid-rant with a colleague, or scribbling notes during a heated brainstorm, or even just muttering to a podcast like it can hear you, listen closely. Something extraordinary might be emerging in that swirl of voices. And if someone gives you a terrible idea, don't throw it away. Tuck it into your mental junk drawer. One day, it might be exactly the weird little puzzle piece you didn't know you were missing. You breeze through logic puzzles. You dominated your high school science fair. You know a suspicious amount about black holes and sourdough starters. But still, when it comes to creative breakthroughs, something feels off. Like your brain is too tidy. Too well trained. Too, dare we say, smart? Here's the uncomfortable truth: sometimes, being highly intelligent can get in the way of scientific creativity. Let's start by clarifying: intelligence is obviously useful. It helps you absorb information, recognize patterns, and follow complex reasoning. But creativity? That's a different beast. It demands messiness, flexibility, and a willingness to chase ridiculous ideas without knowing where they'll lead. And those traits don't always play nicely with the sharp-edged focus of traditional intelligence. There's even a term for this friction: functional fixedness. It's the cognitive bias that locks you into familiar ways of thinking, preventing you from seeing new uses for old tools. Classic study: give someone a candle, a box of thumbtacks, and a lighter. Ask them to mount the candle on the wall without dripping wax. Most people, especially smart ones, try to pin the candle directly or melt it to the surface. But the creative solution? Use the box as a shelf. It's sitting right there, but it hides in plain sight. Highly intelligent people often suffer from functional fixedness because they're so good at recognizing correct answers that they stop looking for alternative ones. Their minds optimize. Streamline. They follow the shortest path, even when a better one zigzags. Philosophers still argue whether intelligence and creativity are fundamentally separate systems or just different flavors of the same cognitive soup. But the data suggests a U-shaped curve. Up to a certain point, intelligence does help creativity. But beyond that, the effect plateaus, or even reverses. That's where strategic ignorance comes in. Strategic ignorance is the art of unknowing, deliberately ignoring some information to stay open to novel insights. It's not being careless. It's being selective. It's choosing not to overthink so your mind has room to play. Case in point, Richard Feynman, yes, him again, deliberately avoided reading certain research papers while working on problems. Why? Because he didn't want other people's assumptions clouding his own approach. He wanted to see it fresh. That's strategic ignorance. Here's your fringe fact. The mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan, whose work transformed number theory, had little formal training in Western mathematics. He developed his formulas from intuition and ancient Hindu texts. Many experts dismissed him, until they realized his backward methods were yielding results no one else could replicate. Sometimes, not knowing the rules is how you invent new ones. So what can you do if your brain is too good at being correct? You confuse it. You disrupt it. You cultivate what psychologist Ellen Langer calls mindfulness, not the meditation kind, but the cognitive kind. The act of deliberately noticing new things. Reframing problems. Asking, what if, when everyone else is asking, what's next? Try explaining your problem to a non-expert. A kid. A bartender. Your grandmother. The moment you translate, you reveal assumptions. You loosen the grip of jargon and let the idea breathe. That's when new angles appear. Or better yet, intentionally adopt a beginner's mindset. Pretend you don't know the answer. Ask naive questions. What if gravity isn't a force? What if cells want to cooperate? What if light could bend backward? Many scientific revolutions began with a what if that sounded ridiculous, until it wasn't. This is also why interdisciplinary thinking matters so much. When you combine fields, say, physics and dance, or neuroscience and architecture, you force your brain to build unfamiliar bridges. It can't rely on shortcuts. It has to invent them. Here's a story. Barbara McClintock, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering genetic transposition, jumping genes, was once described by colleagues as strangely intuitive. She didn't crunch numbers the way they did. She listened to the corn plants. She watched, she waited, she followed their rhythms. It was part science, part surrender. And it changed genetics forever. So no matter how smart you are, try unlearning something. Try taking the long way. Try choosing curiosity over mastery. Let your brain be inefficient. Because sometimes, brilliance hides behind a question you were too clever to ask. That doesn't mean you throw logic away. It means you treat it like a dance partner, one that occasionally steps aside so creativity can lead. And when it does, you might just find yourself discovering not just new answers, but entirely new questions. You haven't showered. You've eaten nothing but string cheese and dry cereal for 2 days. There are diagrams on your window, equations on your napkins, and 3 separate alarms labeled hydration. You're tired. You're irritable. You're so deep in this idea that you're starting to dream in variables. Welcome to scientific obsession, the part of creativity where genius starts to look a lot like compulsion. Let's not sugarcoat it, obsession gets a bad rap. It's the domain of conspiracy theorists, supervillains, and that one friend who talks about their sourdough starter like it's a sentient pet. But in the world of science, Obsession is often the hidden engine behind revolutionary breakthroughs. It's the force that keeps you tinkering with an experiment long after your advisor says, "Let it go." It's the itch that won't let you sleep until the numbers make sense. It's what psychologist Howard Gruber once called the network of enterprise, the idea that creative scientists don't just chase a goal, they build an entire ecosystem of questions, theories, and experiments around it. Obsession, in this sense, isn't random. It's strategic. It's purposeful persistence. And it shows up in the biographies of just about every scientific legend you can name. Marie Curie working in a makeshift shed to isolate radium, inhaling dangerous levels of radiation. Johannes Kepler spending decades trying to fit planetary motion into musical harmonies before finally, exhausted and half-broke, he landed on elliptical orbits. Barbara McClintock, yes, again, sitting with her cornfields for hours, listening, really listening, until she could feel the genes move. You don't get that kind of insight from dabbling. Here's the psychological angle: obsession isn't just a trait. It's a state. Researchers call it harmonious passion when it drives sustained engagement and joy. But they also warn of obsessive passion, where the work starts to consume your identity. It's a knife's edge. Philosophers still debate whether creative obsession is a virtue or a vice. Is it devotion? Or dysfunction? The answer probably depends on whether the obsession leads to discovery, or burnout. And burnout is very real. When the passion curdles, when you stop feeling curious and start feeling trapped, when the question you once loved becomes a chore you can't escape, that's the warning sign. Your brain is asking for a break. Your body, too. But when obsession is healthy, when it's driven by wonder, not fear, it can be the most fertile psychological ground for discovery. Why? Because it shrinks the world. It tunes out distractions. It creates what athletes call the zone and artists call flow. Fringe fact: Michael Faraday, who basically invented electromagnetism as we know it, used to give public lectures to children where he demonstrated his experiments with a kind of gleeful mania. One of his peers described him as possessed by his subject. Possessed, maybe, but in the best way. And don't forget, obsession is contagious. When you're lit up by an idea, other people feel it. They lean in. They ask questions. They offer help. Your obsession creates gravitational pull. Suddenly, you're not alone in the tunnel. Others join you. Shine their lights. Point out details you missed. That's when obsession becomes a movement. But even if you are working alone, maybe on a basement prototype or a 5-year thesis that's part research, part survival, you're not wasting time. You're in the thick of what psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi called deep work. The kind that requires total immersion. The kind that remaps your mind. So if you're pacing the floor tonight, muttering about isotopes or artificial limbs or whether slime mold could predict traffic patterns, real study, by the way, don't panic. Yes, you're obsessed. That's fine. Check in with your body. Drink some water. Maybe touch grass, if necessary. Then keep going. Because the line between fixation and genius is often drawn not by what you're obsessed with, but why. If it's love, curiosity, a deep sense that the answer matters, even if no one else sees it yet, then, friend, you're right on track. You close your eyes and you're not here anymore. You're orbiting Jupiter, recalculating gravitational vectors. You're inside a cell, watching enzymes dance like fireflies. You're rewinding time, tracing a disease to its first mutation. You're not just thinking, you're seeing. Feeling. Moving through imaginary worlds with real precision. Welcome to mental modeling, the invisible superpower behind scientific creativity. Unlike daydreaming or fantasy, mental models are structured simulations. They let you run an experiment in your head before lifting a single beaker. They let you visualize the unseeable, molecular interactions, cosmic timelines, or the future impact of something that hasn't even happened yet. And here's the kicker, you use them constantly. Every time you picture how a dropped ball will bounce, or imagine how someone will react to an email, you're mentally modeling. Scientists just do it on steroids. Take Einstein, again, because of course. He revolutionized physics with Gedanken experiment, or thought experiments. He imagined himself riding a beam of light, falling in an elevator, watching clocks tick differently on speeding trains. These weren't just playful ideas. They were internal simulations, crafted with such vividness they led to new physical laws. That's the magic of the scientific mind. It doesn't wait for reality to give permission. It builds worlds first, then sees which ones might be true. Mainstream psychology loves this stuff. Research on mental imagery shows that the more vividly you can simulate a process, the better you understand it. One study even found that students who mentally rehearsed solving physics problems outperformed those who just reviewed equations. Because once you can see a system, you're more likely to decode it. Fringe fact. Temple Grandin, famous animal behaviorist and autistic advocate, credits her unique thinking style, which she calls thinking in pictures, with helping her redesign livestock facilities around the world. She literally imagined herself as the cow, tracing every movement, every sensory trigger. It wasn't just empathy, it was simulation as science. But here's the kicker, not all mental models are visual. Some are spatial. Some are auditory. Some feel like a kind of embodied intuition. You can't explain how you know, only that it feels right. And philosophers still argue whether this kind of gut knowledge counts as real reasoning. But in the trenches of discovery, it absolutely does. Mental modeling allows scientists to leap across gaps in data, to test hypotheses too expensive or dangerous to run in real life, and to navigate problems so complex that words and numbers can't contain them. Your brain becomes the lab. Your thoughts, the tools. And like any good tool, these models can be refined. You start with a fuzzy image, a sketch, a what if. Then, through research and iteration, you sharpen it. You test the model against reality. You adjust. Redraw. Sometimes you scrap it entirely and start over. But the act of modeling? That's where the deepest creative work happens. Let's take another example. Barbara McClintock, yes, her again, we stan. When she discovered jumping genes, she didn't just crunch numbers. She imagined the corn plant's genome as a responsive, dynamic system. She felt its logic. Her mental model wasn't a spreadsheet, it was a relationship. This kind of immersive thinking is why so many creative scientists speak in metaphors. The atom isn't just a nucleus, it's a solar system. Evolution isn't just descent with modification, it's a tangled tree. The brain isn't just neurons, it's a circuit board, a city, a galaxy. Metaphors are mental models. And when they're good, they reveal hidden structures in the world. Of course, models have limits. They can mislead, oversimplify, trap you inside your own assumptions. That's why it's crucial to test them, to stress the edges, to ask, what am I not seeing? Where does this break? Because the most creative scientists aren't just good modelers. They're good debuggers. They notice when the simulation no longer maps to reality, and they don't take it personally. They revise. So what does this mean for you? It means if you find yourself replaying scenarios in your mind, building systems out of scribbles, explaining your ideas to your showerhead like it's an academic panel, that's not wasted energy. That's modeling. That's creativity in action. Next time you're stuck, try sketching the system. Acting it out. Speaking it aloud. Build a world so rich inside your head that, eventually, the outside world has no choice but to catch up. Because creativity isn't just about asking new questions. It's about seeing the answer before the data even knows it's there. You're stuck. Again. The equations aren't cooperating. The model's broken. Your desk chair feels like a medieval torture device. You get up to stretch, and boom, suddenly, something loosens. Not just your back, but your thinking. One idea flows into another. You're not just moving, you're solving. This, my friend, is embodied cognition, the quietly revolutionary idea that your mind doesn't end at your skull. It lives in your body, too. And for creative scientists, that's a game changer. For centuries, we've imagined thought as something abstract, cold, clinical, brain-bound. But growing research shows that cognition is profoundly physical. Your posture, gestures, facial expressions, even your gut microbes, they all influence how you think, solve, and create. Mainstream psychology is now brimming with studies on this. One famous experiment found that people who physically enacted the process of balancing objects were better at solving physics problems about torque and leverage. The body taught the brain. It sounds simple, but it's radical. Moving helps you think. Scientists aren't just scribbling on notepads, they're pacing, sculpting, miming. Einstein said he never thought in words, only images and muscle feelings. Feynman taught himself equations by feel. Barbara McClintock, yes, we're not done loving her yet, talked about becoming one with the corn she studied. These weren't metaphors. They were methods. Fringe fact. Some tech labs now encourage scientists to walk on treadmills during brainstorming sessions. Not for exercise, but for ideation. The subtle, rhythmic motion seems to dislodge stuck thoughts and promote lateral thinking. Ideas start to move when you do. But it's not just walking. Touch matters. Gesture matters. If you've ever noticed how you talk with your hands while explaining a complex idea, congrats, you're offloading cognition onto movement. Studies show that gesturing doesn't just accompany speech, it shapes thought. The physical act of tracing a spiral while describing DNA? That helps your brain encode and recall the concept better. And then there's making. Physicists who sketch. Chemists who build models. Biologists who rearrange pipettes like they're laying out clues in a murder mystery. Hands-on engagement isn't just busy work, it's a thinking strategy. Philosophers still argue about where the mind begins and ends. Is it neurons only? Or does cognition extend into fingers, tools, environments? But neuroscientists increasingly believe in the extended mind hypothesis, that your brain relies on external props, physical objects, spatial layouts, even muscle memory, to think more clearly. So, what does this mean for your creative process? It means you might need to stop sitting still. Get up. Move. Act it out. If your model's stuck, build it in 3D. If your concept's fuzzy, draw it, even badly. Teach it to your cat. Pace the room. Rewrite the equation while dancing, if it helps. Because creativity isn't just brain work. It's body work. This is why some of your best ideas come in the shower, or while washing dishes, or jogging, or folding laundry. The rhythm of the body quiets the mind static and gives room for new ideas to rise. The act of doing primes the act of knowing. It also explains why certain physical environments feel more thinky than others. High ceilings promote abstract thinking. Dim lighting encourages risk-taking. Rounded corners invite exploration. Your environment doesn't just affect your mood, it shapes your thoughts. And if all this sounds a little woo-woo, don't worry. This isn't magical thinking. It's a return to something ancient. For most of human history, knowledge was embodied. Farmers learned soil by touching it. Astronomers mapped stars by hand. Healers diagnosed by smell, pulse, and intuition. Modern science, in its push for precision, tried to sever the mind from the body. But creativity? It remembers. It's more animal. More whole. So next time your brain seizes up and the page stays blank, step away. Touch something. Build something. Move something. Reconnect your thoughts to your limbs. Because sometimes, the answer doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from thinking with your feet. You're about to start the experiment. You've checked the protocol twice, calibrated the instruments, and, wait. Where's your lucky pen? The one with the weird crack down the barrel and exactly the right weight. You can't run this test without it. Obviously. Congratulations. You've entered the realm of scientific superstition. Don't laugh, nearly every great scientist has had one. Einstein's saggy sweater. Feynman's bongo drums. Edison's tendency to nap with ball bearings in his hands so they'd drop and wake him the moment he slipped into dreamland. Rituals. Charms. Personal folklore. The soft edges around science's sharp tools. It might seem silly, until you realize these odd habits often serve a deeply psychological purpose. We call it the illusion of control, the comforting, and occasionally helpful, belief that we can influence outcomes through unrelated actions. Touch the doorknob twice. Stir clockwise. Wear the blue socks. These behaviors don't cause success, but they correlate with moments of confidence and flow. Your brain builds the link. You keep the ritual. Mainstream research backs this up. A 2016 study showed that athletes who engaged in personal rituals, no matter how irrational, performed better under pressure. Why? Because rituals reduce anxiety. They give structure to chaos. And for scientists facing the unknowable every day, that structure can be vital. Especially when experiments fail. When the data won't align. When the lab light flickers one too many times and you begin to suspect the universe is trolling you personally. A small ritual, a breath, a scribble, a sip from the same chipped mug, becomes a lifeline. These rituals aren't always cute, by the way. Marie Curie kept a vial of radium in her pocket like a good luck charm. Spoiler, not the healthiest choice. But it speaks to the emotional gravity of these talismans. They aren't just habits. They're companions on the journey through the unknown. Fringe fact. Some researchers have found that writing down a fear before a high-stakes task, just a sentence or two, can significantly improve performance. Why? Because the act of ritualizing the fear externalizes it. It stops echoing inside your skull and turns into something you can handle. Like writing down a nightmare and locking it in a drawer. Philosophers still debate whether rituals have intrinsic value or if their power lies purely in perception. But in the landscape of creativity, perception is power. If the weird socks help you focus, they're doing their job. And these rituals extend beyond the individual. Labs develop them, too. The traditional, first pipette, for new students. The inside joke scribbled on whiteboards. The unspoken rule that whoever breaks the centrifuge buys pizza. These aren't just quirks, they're social glue. They foster belonging. And belonging, as psychology tells us, is a bedrock of creative confidence. Here's the important part, these rituals don't have to be rational. In fact, the best ones rarely are. They bypass your frontal lobe and speak directly to your nervous system. They whisper, "You've done this before. You've got this." So what's your lucky pen? Maybe it's a specific playlist. Or the way you always start with the easiest variable. Or the fact that you light a candle while reading a dense article, not for mood, but because the flicker helps you focus. Maybe it's even this, you always clean your workspace before a big idea. Not because you love tidiness, but because it feels like clearing the runway. Your brain starts believing the ritual is part of the process, and soon, it is. And hey, maybe it's placebo. But placebos work. They don't lie to your biology, they speak to it. They tell it, you are safe. You are prepared. You are entering sacred territory now. That's what science is, after all. A ritual of curiosity. A series of controlled gestures, performed with reverence for the unknown. And if a little superstition helps you get there? Fantastic. So light the candle. Tap the notebook. Hum your weird little pre-experiment song. Science is already half belief, and belief, when shaped right, can become a powerful creative tool. Because at the end of the day, you're not just chasing truth. You're dancing with it. And sometimes, truth likes it when you wear the lucky socks. You're staring at the same line of code for the third hour. The equation is perfect, on paper. The microscope's been humming for days. You've run the test, logged the variables, double-checked the spreadsheet. And still, nothing. No breakthrough. No spark. No revelation. Just the slow, patient ticking of your own persistence. Welcome to the quietest part of scientific creativity, patience. It's not glamorous. You won't see it in movie montages. Nobody wins awards for waiting. But in the psychological machinery of innovation, patience is the unsung hero. The slow drip that carves the canyon. We often associate creativity with speed, flashes of brilliance, sudden insight, chaotic genius. But most scientific revolutions unfold not in moments, but in months. Years. Decades. And behind those discoveries? People who were willing to wait. To work. To stay. Mainstream psychology confirms this. In studies of creative professionals across disciplines, one trait consistently separates the exceptional from the merely competent: grit. Angela Duckworth defines it as sustained passion and perseverance for long-term goals. In science, that means staying curious through boredom. Returning to a question even after 50 failed attempts. Letting an idea rest, only to come back when the world, or your mind, is ready. It's the long game. And it's hard. Because patience in science isn't passive. It's not about sitting with your hands folded, humming in a field of daisies. It's active endurance. It's showing up again. And again. And again. Even when nothing's working. Even when your peers are publishing, your inbox is mocking you, and your self-doubt has learned how to type. Fringe fact. Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics, conducted thousands of pea plant experiments over 8 years. He tracked inherited traits meticulously, even when results were unclear, messy, or inconsistent. Then he published his findings, and was ignored for decades. Only long after his death did the scientific community realize they'd overlooked the foundation of modern biology. Talk about long-term thinking. Philosophers still argue whether creativity is best fueled by urgency or tranquility. But in scientific discovery, tranquility wins more often than you think. The most groundbreaking insights often arrive not with fireworks, but with a sigh. A whisper. A quiet, after years of silence. And the thing about patience? It's contagious. When you slow down, you notice more. You see patterns others miss. You ask better questions. You stop chasing solutions like a dog chasing a car and start inviting them in like a host at the door. Of course, patience comes with its enemies: doubt, envy, fatigue. Watching others leap ahead while you're still rearranging your variables can feel like emotional whiplash. But the creative mind learns to decouple pace from progress. Just because it's taking time doesn't mean it's not working. Imagine creativity like fermentation. Sometimes you stir and poke. But often, you wait. You trust the invisible process. You let the flavor deepen. No amount of pacing will make the yeast rise faster. But that doesn't mean it's not rising. This is especially true for complex problems. The ones that can't be solved in a sprint or a week of caffeine-fueled brilliance. These problems require slow thinking. Layered thinking. The kind that curls in on itself like a vine before it climbs. And you? You're learning to honor that pace. To protect the long arc of your work, even when your inbox demands otherwise. To push back against the instant gratification world that treats thinking time as wasted time. It's not. It's essential. So tonight, if you're stuck, if you're tired, if your idea still hasn't come home, breathe. You are not behind. You are becoming. Some discoveries don't roar. They whisper. And the creative mind, well trained in patience, learns to listen. So now you rest. Let the rhythm slow. Let the theories soften. You've walked through the deep, tangled forest of creativity tonight, its shadows, its surprises, its quiet clearings. You've learned that discovery isn't always explosive. Sometimes, it's the faintest echo in the silence. You've seen that genius isn't chaos or order, it's a balance of both. A dance between structure and improvisation, play and persistence, obsession and surrender. That science, at its core, is an act of faith. In curiosity. In failure. In the mind's endless capacity to reimagine the world. And in you. Because whether you're chasing particles or writing code, building models, or just daydreaming out the window, you're part of this long, strange tradition. This very human impulse to ask, what if? So let that question linger. Let it drift with you into sleep. Let it rearrange itself behind your dreams. You've earned the stillness now. The quiet after the search. The gentle hum that tells your unconscious mind, keep going. We'll try again tomorrow. And who knows? Maybe while you sleep, something shifts. An idea reshapes. A neuron lights up, unnoticed, in the dark. No rush. Creativity has never been in a hurry. Good night, curious one. The next discovery might already be on its way.